Me too. I got two cold actually. Sorry. Alright. All right, good morning. How's everyone? It's almost May. Hard to believe it's almost May. I'm very aware of May 1st, which is my twins' birthday. So like in like 4 days, they turn 11, which is just crazy that they're 11. I keep getting all the like reminders of like 12 years ago right now, we were like almost in labor, but this was a very eventful week. I think I shared with you, maybe not, I was literally in class and my partner was like, you better get here now. I was like, oh, okay, well, turn in your crap, I gotta go. Like, I was like running out of there, like I left my computer, like I wasn't even.
Thank you.
So, and then I had like 3 days, like before they were out. So anyway, I know we're kind of jumping around, like we had Jasmine come last time, and I want to go back to STIs, and we will probably on Wednesday. I have an activity that I want to do to kind of close that up, and then I want to share a couple of slides. Feedback on her presentation. I think she's great. I really like her quite a bit. I think she's a really great energy, and I appreciate her inclusivity, and her language with me. And I know that the pictures aren't fun, but it used to be so much worse. They used to come in like 8 years ago, they would come in and they had a video that they played and it was all graphic pictures set to music. And it was like, you left feeling gross, right? So I know STIs are fun, but I do think the pictures are important and she kept it pretty minimal, which I think is nice. So what we'll do today is we'll go back to this. And then once we get through the rest of chapter 12, we'll then move back to STIs and kind of wrap that up. So sorry for the little bit of kind of jumping around, but any like thoughts or comments, anything before we get back here? Anything else? Counting the number of days yet? Is anybody counting days left for the semester? Right. People are so mixed. Some people are like counting and want me to mention it, and other people are like, don't, it overwhelms me. So I'll just say we're getting there, right? It feels like summer's coming, though then it rained on Saturday randomly, and it was just long enough to cancel all of our soccer games. Like, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going back to bed, right? I was okay with it. So, anyway, we'll go back to where we were. We left off here. It feels like a while ago. But we were talking about kind of the different trimesters and the stages of development. And then here's where I have that we didn't go past, right? Does that look familiar? Right. So in terms of the experience of pregnancy, we talked a lot about getting pregnant, and all of the things involved in that and the assisted reproductive technologies and so on. Once somebody is pregnant and going through all of these processes, there's obviously can be very different from pregnancy to pregnancy, from person to person. This can be a very challenging experience, or it can be a very pleasant one, or kind of everywhere in between, right? People are kind of all over the board. So every woman has a very different emotional and physical reaction to pregnancy. Obviously, your motivations behind getting pregnant can play a big role in that, the amount of support you have, your health, a million different factors. There are a lot of physical symptoms that people tend to experience during pregnancy. Now, again, kind of all over the place in terms of sometimes they're very severe and other times they're incredibly minimal. But the most common one by far is morning sickness. It's something a lot of women experience, and it's kind of a misnomer because this can be at any time of day. It tends to be most like severe in the morning, which is why it got its name, because people tend to have higher levels of like hormones in the morning when they wake up. But it can be at any time. And this is often like nausea and vomiting. Sometimes people have a hard time getting food in or even keeping it down. Odd cravings can sometimes come during pregnancy too. I'm sure you've seen some of the like random like social media videos of people craving odd things due to deficiencies. My partner in the first pregnancy, all she wanted was In-N-Out. And like that might not sound bad, but after 9 months of only eating In-N-Out, it took me a long time to want In-N-Out again. Like just the smell of In-N-Out like would make me sick. Like I was getting morning sickness from In-N-Out because we ate there so much. And then in the second pregnancy was all juice. All she wanted was apple juice. Like I went to Costco and bought gallons and gallons of apple juice, right? At least that one I didn't have to smell the in and out, right? But it's very common for people to have cravings, to feel sick when they eat food. There's oftentimes a lot of physical discomfort that people feel as they start to, especially get a little bit bigger, right? As the baby or babies get bigger, it puts pressure on their hips and on their legs, which can be a little uncomfortable. When you start feeling the baby move, that can be a little uncomfortable as well, especially in a first pregnancy. Partners can often experience symptoms too. Really interesting psychologically. There's something called Couvade syndrome. It's French for to hatch. And what you sometimes see is that partners, male, female, otherwise, right, any partner, they can sometimes feel morning sickness as well. And kind of go through some of those sympathetic reactions on a varying degree of severity. Another thing that's often talked a lot about is sex during pregnancy. Is that okay or not? And generally, yes, right? Until or unless a doctor says otherwise. Sometimes when people have complications during pregnancy, a doctor might tell you to refrain. When the bigger you get as well, with your stomach getting bigger and bigger, sometimes it makes it more difficult and more uncomfortable the longer you go into pregnancy. So it tends to be something that tapers off. Though sometimes people use it as that's the best way to induce labor. So is going on a walk as a side note. But there are, typically it is allowed, but there are sometimes restrictions if somebody has medical complications. But a lot of physical side effects. And as I mentioned, some women it's very, very mild, and others it can be very pronounced. I have an example of this great movie. Where did I put it? What to Expect When You're Expecting. This is based off of a book. It was probably the most popular book for pregnancy ever written. And they made a movie a few years ago, and I'd like to play a clip from it for you. And I think it's a great example of some of those physical and emotional. And it can be that people do have a lot of physical kind of experiences. Not always, but it is relatively common. Let me turn this back on. So a few other things here, right? Obviously taking care of yourself and your health and being monitored are also really important during pregnancy and really important for that fetal development. A couple of things here, right? The placenta is the part that gives all of that nourishment to the baby, right? So everything that the woman puts into their body after the first 3 months or so, where they have that separate sac, like I mentioned last time, they are getting every single thing that woman ingests, which is why it is so restrictive when you are pregnant. What are some of the things that you're not supposed to put into your system when you're pregnant? Yeah. Sushi, right? Raw fish, right? You can't break down the mercury, and it can cause all kinds of issues with brain development. I heard someone say alcohol. What else? Yeah. Alcohol. Okay, alcohol, perfect. Yeah.
Not a lot of salt.
Yeah, you're supposed to be really careful with your salt intake. Other things and sugars, yeah.
Certain amount of caffeine.
Yeah. Caffeine's an interesting gray area, right? Like a little is okay, but too much of it can go awry. Yeah. Yeah, certain deli meats are really dangerous, right? That they're not processed enough, and they can cause issues with development as well. Any kind of drug, like prescribed medications, are often people might have to go off of them for a period of time, including antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, which can sometimes be tricky if someone has mental health concerns. There's a bunch of things like that you have to be careful with. Yeah.
Not get pregnant. I know there's certain medications you're not supposed to take because they'll not work with your birth control.
Yeah, right. They can interact with each other in a dangerous way, or make one less effective. Yeah, there's a whole list of things. It's kind of wild, all the things that you have to be careful of. If you consume too much of certain things, like alcohol is one of the most dangerous things. Alcohol and any kind of nicotine, right? Anything with nicotine can be really dangerous for the lung development of that fetus. But alcohol can cause things like fetal alcohol syndrome. Obviously, people can run into issues with things like a spontaneous abortion or a miscarriage, even when they do everything right. It's awful. Some people do everything wrong and they never run into any problems, and people do everything right and they run into every issue, right? So you obviously want to do everything in your control, but sometimes people have that happen. It's most common in the first trimester. And the first 13 weeks is when you're most likely to see someone have a miscarriage. And they might not even know that they're pregnant yet, right? Or barely know. But because everything is unfolding in those first 13 weeks, if something goes wrong in that biological unfolding, that's when you're most likely to have a miscarriage. Yeah.
I just want to back to it really before I said it, but you're also not supposed to have grapefruit on birth control.
Grapefruit on birth control specifically. Interesting, grapefruit, right? So yeah, reasons to not eat grapefruit. My sister's partner's sister, wow, I went like the completely wrong direction on that one. My partner's sister had a miscarriage the day before her baby was born. So awful, right? I mean, literally, she had a scheduled C-section, today, Monday, scheduled C-section at 8 in the morning on a Monday and had a miscarriage Sunday. Her son, like, Ethan, like, name picked out, they had everything ready. 13-pound baby, really, really large child. He was gonna be delivered via C-section, the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. Who just didn't make it. Like, so this can happen at any point, most likely, like I said, on that first 13 weeks, but it can go all the way up until like the day before, which was really, really traumatically sad. Other things that people sometimes experience, preeclampsia is a common one. As people get closer to going into labor, which we'll get into shortly, if their blood pressure goes up too high, they might require monitoring. Right, preeclampsia and then eclampsia can be really dangerous for the person carrying the baby. It's just high blood pressure, which can lead to a stroke, a seizure, or all sorts of issues. So as people get farther and farther along, they require more monitoring. You go into a doctor pretty regularly to get checkups, to check up on the baby and you. And so really important to be monitored, right? The nutrition and health and like monitoring, really important during this whole process. Yeah.
Is that one that if you're having like a natural birth, it can cause like
When you have high blood pressure,
Yeah.
it can, right? It can cause, like, it's also something called a placenta previa, where the placenta separates, and that one tends to cause more bleeding. And not super common, but you know, these are all things that can happen. And typically when someone is in the hospital, they're pretty like guarded with all these things, but when you're doing a home birth, there's something like that where you don't have a doctor present, it can become more and more dangerous. The way that we do a lot of this monitoring, specifically for the baby or babies, is an ultrasound or a sonogram, sometimes called. Typically look kind of like this black and white picture here, though you can get 3D ultrasounds, which are a little more like detailed and fun to look at. I think I have let me see, I think I have a video of what these look like. I can play for you, see if it works, but the sound, there's no sound anyway, so I don't think it matters. Like how much fluid is still in the uterus, you know, what is the positioning looking like, right? Kind of getting an idea of the size, of the baby as well. There's also some options you can do as far as like screening goes. And these are totally optional, and some people opt for them and some people don't. But you can do things like an amniocentesis, chorionic villus sampling, or this new one, MSAFP. There's a couple of different things you can do to look at abnormalities in the growing fetus or baby, right? And so, as I said, sometimes these are done, sometimes they're not. It depends on your insurance and your personal preference. Amniocentesis is like the old standby. They take a very long needle, and that's what's happening in this bottom picture. And they remove a little bit of the fluid from the uterus, and then you can test that to look for some kind of chromosomal abnormality or defect. They're not always accurate. What they do tend to tell you very accurately is the sex of the baby. And then somewhere around like 15 to 20 weeks, you can often find out if they're more prone to like Downs or like some of the chromosomal developmental conditions that can develop. This one's starting to become more popular. It's not as invasive in some ways. They take a small sliver from the placenta, also with like a needle, and you can check for some of these abnormalities. The downside to some of these things is they tend to give a lot of like false positives, right? And so it'll come back of like you're 99% likely to have a child Down syndrome, and then you have to decide what you want to do with that information, and it may or may not be correct. Right? Very, very common to have those concerns. like pop up, and there's some blood tests that we can sometimes use now as well. But they're not 100% accurate. And then what do you do with that information if you come back and find out like, well, I'm 99% likely to have a child with Down syndrome? Then you have choices you have to discuss and think about. Was that a
Don't correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there like a really low risk of like miscarriage or something? Like
Yeah.
Consistency loss?
really low, but it's there,
Is it
right?
like 1.5 to like 2%?
I want to say it's even less than that, right? But like you are disrupting the environment, and so it's really low. Like the benefits of it, like if it's something that runs in your family, is when people tend to do these things more commonly. I mean, anytime you disturb that environment, you're running risks, but it's low. It's definitely low. Mhm. So whether or not you choose to do these or not is totally up to you and your insurance and what it covers. But there are a lot of ways you can look at screening for like what's going on with that baby or babies. And then you can decide from there. Yeah.
I just wanted to share, so when I had my ultrasound with my daughter, they were able to tell that she had a heart
Yeah.
defect. And so they were able to diagnose it, so they were on standby when she was born. Which is really funny because when she was born, it didn't really show right away. It wasn't until a little bit down the road that it did.
Mhm.
But yeah, so she ended up they could detect
Yeah.
that she had by like shadowing around the heart. And it's very scary because they don't say anything at first. They're just like rolling over and rolling. And
They
then
often say nothing during
they
it, which
say
is awful,
nothing,
right?
and then they'll just kind of like nicely excuse themselves. And then you have a bunch of other doctors come in and you're like, wait, this isn't what normally goes on. And they even had me stay longer, and then they even pulled in a pediatric cardiologist, and yeah, so it was,
Scary, right? Yeah.
it is very scary, but you know, hey, it grew a little flat, like scar tissue, and she, you know, she's fine now,
Right.
so.
Yeah,
You never know, but it's nice to know, because then you can be prepared.
Right,
and
yeah.
Getting to those appointments and stuff like that,
Yeah.
you need it.
and that's the big advantage, right? Is if you know that there's something going on, you can be prepared for it. You have sometimes have a team on standby,
Yeah.
ready to help deal with issues if they come up. Yeah, and you know, a lot of people do these, right? Some of them, like the amniocentesis, has started to fall out of favor, but people still do it, right? If they would like to know. Typically, you can tell the sex from an ultrasound, but that is like the surefire way to find out the sex if you really want to know. My daughter with Kaya, she was like really like modest the whole time she was in there. Like every time we do an ultrasound, she'd tuck into a ball. And so we had no idea like all the way through what her sex was, right? Like every time we're like, come on, move around a little bit. I was like, come on, drink some juice or something. We're like poking at her stomach, trying to get her to move. And she would just ball up every time, right? And we would never be able to tell all the way until like the moment she was born. They were like, pretty sure it's a girl. But then I swear when they pulled her out, they paused for like 12 seconds. It was probably like a half a second, but they were like, congratulations, it's a, and like we're in my mind in that half a second, it was like, we didn't talk about whether or not we do circumcision or any of that. Like it was a girl, right? So in addition to all of that, you're also typically doing these like childbirth classes. These are typically covered by insurance or offered by insurance. Like for example, I have Kaiser, pretty common insurance, and like they offer these for free to parents. Kind of a cool way to meet other people who are pregnant and going through the same stuff that you are. And it's also great for learning like what are my options when I go into labor, because you do have a lot of options for how you want to handle pain, how you want to handle active labor, and so on. And they teach you a lot of stuff in these like breathing exercises and positioning and reminders about what to do and not do, how to change a diaper when that baby is born, how to breastfeed, all those things that you may or may not know. Another thing that sometimes people do is they hire a midwife or a doula. These are things that you can do privately, but it's basically someone who's like an intermediary between you and the doctor. And they come in and they're there for you and they help you and they guide you through the whole process. Typically nurses would help you with that. You can also hire someone if you want a little bit more support. But lots of these great like prepared childbirth classes. And as I said, they're typically offered by insurance companies or at a hospital, or you can also do them privately. Any other like thoughts or questions or comments or anything before I keep going? Anything else for now? So labor and childbirth, right? So after roughly 9 months, and very few babies are born on their due date. It's like 4% of babies are born on their due date. It's typically within a matter of weeks of it. But as people get closer and closer to their due date, they start having these contractions called Braxton Hicks contractions, the first bullet there. They're like warm-up contractions, right? They're not the real thing. Though oftentimes, first time pregnancies, the people will go to the hospital thinking they're in labor. But what you tend to see with these is they're like milder contractions as your uterus is kind of warming up for the big event. So you see that this is pretty common to happen like days or weeks even leading up to being in labor. And there's kind of a general rule that we have to decide when somebody's in active labor. And so what we tend to do is call it the 5-1-1 rule. 1-1 rule. And this means you're in active labor. Active labor meaning like you need to go to the hospital because you're about to have a baby or babies. So what this means is you have contractions that are 5 minutes apart. Okay, so every 5 minutes you're having a contraction. They last for 1 minute each. For at least an hour. So when you're having contractions that are 5 minutes apart, they're about a minute long each for an hour, you're in active labor and should go to the hospital. The other thing that would cause you to go to the hospital sooner is if your water breaks. Really common stereotype that people's water break, their water will break and then they need to go to the hospital and you're in labor. It actually doesn't happen very often. Typically, your water will break, or your bag of waters is the technical name for it. It's all the fluid that's surrounding the baby in the uterus. That amniotic fluid will come out as you are pushing the baby out in active labor. But sometimes somebody's water will break. And if that happens, you have 24 hours or less to deliver that baby because they no longer have fluid to breathe. So either you're in active labor or your water breaks. Now you have to go to the hospital. Yeah.
It's so calm because, she just didn't really have painful contractions.
Sure.
So the nurse didn't believe her, and then within the hour, she had a baby. The lady's like, "You're not, you'll know." No, yeah, I do know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
How funny. Yeah, and it can change from baby to baby. Like sometimes, like my partner's the third in her family, and like it was like a 20-minute labor, right? And her oldest sister was like 36 hours, right? Like so usually subsequent pregnancies, whole process goes much faster, but the first time it can be a lengthy process, right? Usually your body kind of knows what to do the second time. But when people are in that first stage of labor, it lasts like 10 to 16 hours on average of this, right? And contractions like this, they stop you in your tracks, right? Like for everyone has a different pain tolerance, but typically when people are in active labor, they can't carry on like normal. My partner, the second she got into active labor, she's like, let's clean the house. So when we get home, everything's clean. I was like, you're in active labor. We're going to the hospital. I got my bag of Oreos. I'm ready to go. Right? Like my dad was like, you got to have Oreos for pregnancy. I was like, okay, right. I have my bag of double stuffed Oreos, our baby bag. I'm ready to leave. And she's like, we're cleaning the house because when I come home with a baby, I won't want to. I was like, that sums you up right there. You're such a Capricorn. But we cleaned the house while she was in active labor. She'd be like vacuuming and stuff. And like, I was like, here, let me do that, please. Like, but I mean, this can last a long time for people, like 10 to 16 hours on average, and then faster for subsequent babies. What's happening during this labor, what the pain is your cervix opening up, right? So the cervix, when you're pregnant, is closed to keep all of that fluid in there. And then as you enter into labor, your cervix effaces and dilates, which means it opens up and stretches out to prepare for that baby to come through. And that's what you see in these images here. And that's why your water breaks eventually, because it opens and that fluid just comes out. Typically like a slow leak, but for some it can happen a little quicker. When your cervix is closed all the way, and then you can see when it's fully dilated, that means you're at about 10 centimeters. Now for reference, 1 centimeter is a Cheerio. 2, like a lifesaver, 3, a banana, and Nilla wafer. I had to equate it to food here, right? And Oreo, there's the Oreos again. Tomato, an English muffin, and then a bagel, right? So 10 centimeters dilated, when you're fully dilated and open, it's about the opening size of a bagel, right? So your body stays closed until you're in this pregnant, like labor, full labor. And then what happens then is that pain is the opening up and dilating of your cervix. And so that's what the contractions are, is they prepare for that baby to come down through the vaginal canal. Yeah.
With me, I was with my son, the first child, it was days.
Mhm.
And the problem, I wasn't dilating, I was effacing.
Yeah.
But I
We weren't
yeah,
progressing.
so then I went in and they strip your membranes, it's a lovely little thing, which then started bleeding and whatnot, and
Yeah.
then so, and then you really have no choice but to get to that point. too,
Right.
Besides, the water breaking, but yeah, they even had a hard time breaking my water, it was just, it's a lot more like durable than people realize,
Yeah.
that bag of water, it's a lot more solid.
Media have that, like, oh, you're in labor, it breaks, but
Yeah,
it
no.
doesn't, it tends to just kind of slowly leak
Leak.
out.
Yeah,
When you're in labor, which typically you're in the hospital at that point, and it may or may not be like something dramatic.
yeah, and I did it without any drugs, my
Mhm.
son, no drugs, nothing, just an IV. And I was very adamant, I would even let, they showed, cause he had an internal monitor that was hooked to his scalp.
Mhm.
So they showed me how to use the leads so I could unhook, I had leads hanging out of me.
Right, yeah.
So I could still walk around the hospital, but I delivered him with no drugs and, it was days that I was in labor with him,
Yeah.
active labor. with
And that
him.
was your first.
And that was my first. Now, my
Mhm.
second, I said, oh, hells no, give me some epidural.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that one a lot more, but
That's a funny way
the
of putting it.
first one, I just had to, that I was like
Sure.
superwoman, and I did, but comes with that is like tearing and a lot more pain afterwards. So it's
Yeah.
something to take into consideration.
And you do have a lot of choices when it comes to like your pain management. So the most common thing that people do, and you mentioned it, is to have what's called an epidural. Right, and so they put you in this like chair that you kind of hug on to the thing in front of you, and they give you an injection near your spine. Right, there's one called a spinal, which is more intense, where they literally numb you from like the chest down. If that happens, if you get a spinal where you have blocked all pain, C-section is almost guaranteed. Now, when you have an epidural, you increase your chances of a C-section as well because you have less sensation, so it's a little harder to push. But it blocks a lot of the pain, so you're not so miserable. You can also do like a global injection of like a painkiller, but that goes straight to the baby. And so that's not as popular, but it is another option. Or you can do it with nothing,
Yes.
which a lot of people opt to do as well. So it's kind of all over the place. Getting an epidural is pretty common, right? A lot of people, it's something like 90% of people who go through labor do an epidural. They're pretty safe for the most part, though sometimes they can have some long lasting effects like headaches and numbness in the area where they did the injection. Okay, so when you go through the first stage, 10 to 16 hours opening up, the second stage is once you are fully dilated. You're all the way open, fully dilated. This is when you're pushing the baby out. Typically, this only lasts 30 minutes to 2 hours. If it goes much longer than that, they typically push you toward a C-section. What that means is the baby's not progressing down through the vaginal canal. It's not a place where they can stay stuck. There isn't enough room for them there. So if somebody is pushing and the baby doesn't come out, at that point, they might schedule what they would call like an emergency C-section, right? And that happens a lot as well. So my partner got an epidural, passed out during it. I was freaking out, right? Like they wouldn't let me in there. They kicked me out of the room, right? All right, fine. I'll go eat my Oreos somewhere else, right? But she had an epidural and then pushed for 2 hours. Kaya didn't come out, so we had to do a C-section. And then once you've had a C-section once, they typically do it the second time as well. And with twins, you almost always have a C-section. So this is when you're actively pushing, crowning. You've ever heard that term? That's when you can see the baby's head, right? The baby's head is kind of starting to come out. And then you give birth here, the third stage. after you give birth, is the afterbirth coming out. The uterine wall, the placenta, right? All of that kind of material comes out. It's like one last push. People typically barely remember this because they're holding the baby at that point or babies at that point. But it is important to get all of that out as well. Lots of interesting cultural beliefs about the placenta. Some people will consume it. Other people will save it. You can save it for like research and stem cell research stuff. But some people do consume it as part of a cultural belief. Most hospitals just get rid of it as like medical waste, right? But you do have the right to keep it if it's something that you want to do. Right? Any comments, thoughts, anything here? Questions, thoughts, comments, stories? Yes. No, it's you cook it usually. Not, I mean, it depends. Like, I have heard of people eating it raw. It's usually cooked, right? But there's a wide variety of beliefs and practices about the placenta specifically. So it's kind of all over the place. It's interesting. Yeah.
When nothing else knows and gave birth.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Right. Lots of interesting things around the placenta, specifically the placenta. Yeah.
I remember another cool thing was when I was crowning.
Uh-huh.
They will, they'll